Welcome to the Ranch Workforce Project, a limited series collaboration between the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and Montana State University's Dan Scott Ranch Management Program, a project to address the domestic labor shortage on farms and ranches, a project to replenish the pipeline, a project to attract new people into an old industry, a project to face what has to change from within. Because the future of agriculture doesn't just depend on land and livestock, it depends on people. And now, your host, Haylie, Shipp.
Thank you for joining us as we continue to work through the Ranch Workforce Project. We are on episode number 4, and we've talked about prospecting for employees. We've talked about hiring and doing that job interview well. Now you've got the hook set. It's time to onboard that employee. Make sure that you're setting not only them, but the ranch up for success. And to have that discussion with us today, Aaron Paulson. Aaron has supervised over 60 seasonal employees in his career as a ranch manager. He now works with the Switchback Ranch out of Red Lodge, Montana. As always, Rachel Frost joining us. Rachel, the co-host here on the Ranch Workforce Project. Rachel, why don't you go ahead and kind of introduce this topic today?
Thanks, Haylie. I'm really excited about this topic as well. I think it's really important. First impressions matter, and we have been talking a lot about bringing people who potentially are new to the industry into ranching, into that workforce, and their first experience on a ranch can speak volumes to whether they're going to stay in this industry. And it also is a testament to that ranch itself. You're building your reputation, building that culture that we're going to talk about in upcoming episodes as well. So onboarding is really, it's just the process of bringing a new employee on and helping them feel comfortable, giving them the tools to succeed, giving them the lay of the land so that they know what they're getting into and they feel prepared to go out on a day-to-day basis. And that first impression is really important to help set those people up for success.
Onboarding is such a technical term, and I don't think I even realized what that term was until I started with Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and got, a welcome packet that kind of explained what the goals were for the position. And it was the first time we'd been so professional. And I thought, wow, this would have been nice to have in previous positions that I have had. So I'm excited about this topic too. Aaron, why don't you give us your elevator speech? Who are you? Where do you work? Why is this topic something that we're talking to you about today?
Okay. I work for the Switchback Ranch, and we're based out of Red Lodge, Montana. Kind of Roscoe would be the home base for us. And then we also operate over in Wyoming, near Clark, Wyoming, and up on the mountains along the Chief Joseph Highway towards the Beartooth Pass. So we are primarily a cattle operation. And of course, we wouldn't be there if we weren't managing soil and land health and all of those that come first and foremost. And cattle are our tool for revenue driven or economic enterprise. So I went to college in Bozeman. After college, I went to work for a company out of Bozeman and spent a number of years on construction management, which has kind of been the start of understanding managing people and working with people. And then after that time period, I went to work for about 10 years for Turner Enterprises and managed a couple properties in Southwest Montana. Great experiences there that, again, helped build on where I am today. Spent about 5 years in Big Timber managing a ranch, and then the last year and a half here in Roscoe. So that kind of, at least, is a quick summary of who I am and where I'm at.
And so, Aaron, give me an idea. How many employees are you working with there? You're the agricultural manager with Switchback Ranch. What's the workforce look like underneath of you?
Because of where we're at, and it's a complex operation in regard to elevation, predators, classes of cattle, things like that, but also very efficient in terms of a lack of center pivot irrigation and farming and some of that. So to abbreviate that a little bit, we've got 4 to 5 full-time employees between Montana and Wyoming, and then we hire 3 or 4 seasonal employees. So in some ways, kind of a small labor force compared to some of the peers and other people in this industry, but I think it speaks to the efficiency in terms of the way the ranch is structured.
Great. Thank you for that. That's kind of like one of those questions. How many cattle do you have? How many acres do you run? But I appreciate you being transparent with this as we kind of put it all into perspective. So During one of the previous podcasts, we talked to Trey Patterson about making sure that you're hiring the right employee. And this podcast, like we discussed, is going to go into more about that onboarding and getting that employee off to the best start. But Aaron, before we do that, I'm just curious how you attract seasonal employees where you're at. Any tips or tricks that you've learned to really make that right hire?
That is the $1,000,000 question, isn't it, Haylie? I mean, I think that so many people have different ways of going about this, and working with Rachel on and off over the last maybe 5 or 6 years, and working with the Covera Coalition and advertising through Ranch World ads, and kind of that concept of using social media, and trying to embrace that in a cautious way because it can really be tricky as well. And I think that the underlying premise to all of that is that the like begets like, right? The good energy that we're putting out there hopefully is going to attract people, and that might mean it's somebody we don't know about that we pull in off of a Ranch World ads posting, or that Rachel knows somebody that they can send our way, or a friend of a friend. But I think that um, certainly the most effective thing that I've seen is that the better energy we can have within our crew, and that stems, of course, from trying to be a good leader and making sure that we have a good work environment and we're working for purpose. I think that that's really been the baseline for bringing in new or additional people.
So, Rachel, we did some definitions with Dan Leahy and Taylor Sitzemple a few episodes back about interns, apprentices, seasonal labor, and kind of defined what those are. As we're discussing this program today, where do you see this kind of fitting into those three sectors? Are we talking about all of them really, or are we talking more in one area or the next?
I think we're talking about all of them. I mean, Aaron has experience across all of those different sectors. And regardless, it doesn't matter, even if you're hiring a full-time employee, those first 30 days, that impression of what you are like as an operation, how you're establishing a culture with them, are you providing them the tools to be safe and to be effective and to understand truly what their job is and what success looks like. I'm a fan of Brene Brown, and one of her sayings is paint done for me. And so I think we're trying to paint successful for these employees. What does it look like? Give them a visual of that. And that applies across all of them. It's just a shorter term, right? Those interns are shorter term positions where we're getting something out of them, but we're also investing in their learning. Apprenticeships are longer terms where we're going to invest in them over a number of multiple months, maybe even years in their growth. Those seasonals we might only have for a summer, but each one of them still needs to be successful. We've got roles and expectations for them, and we've got to paint what that looks like for them in this process.
Great. Thank you for that, Rachel. Aaron, as we talk about hiring these seasonal employees, we're not talking about the full-time crew that you've got day in, day out, but these are the ones that are floating in. I think you said 3 or 4-ish, throughout the year. What sort of a demographic have you had the most luck with in finding that sort of employee?
We've tried that approach from different directions. So we've tried some high school, late age high school kids. We've tried college kids. We've tried those that are just out of high school, and we've tried some that are, maybe that 50 to 60-year-old. And kind of, it's been a broad brush approach. But I think that the demographic that's fit our needs, amongst the last 15 or 16 years of the career that I've been in on managing ranches, it's been really fitting to find those kids that are likely just out of college or the tail end of college. They have a pretty good idea what they want to do. They have maybe a little better skill set, a little bit more maturity. And I think that age has lent itself to them possibly wanting to maybe tie into us for more than 1 year. So it's not been infrequent to maybe get those people for 2 years back to back before they take a big leap and go and saddle up and take on a full-time career somewhere. And that's worked really well. So I would say more often than not, maybe it's a 22, 23-year-old person, not to be too specific, but those ones have been probably our best success, and most likely to have them stick through the full term and maybe come back a second year.
So, Rachel, we had a discussion after the discussion on a previous podcast, and I think it was with Dr. Trey Patterson, about the reality that sometimes these employees are going to come in with significant others. And so as you're thinking about that hiring process, you're also thinking about, is this going to be a good fit for their partner? Seasonal labor, probably not as much so as a full-time hire that might be on the place, but still something to consider. And so, Rachel, I just wanted to give us the opportunity to talk actually on the podcast a touch about that. Because when you're going to these rural areas, very often, if somebody has a significant other, it's a two-person package.
Right. It is a two-person package. And I think it's something that has a lot of influence on an individual's happiness. Happy wife, happy life is my husband's favorite saying. And just recognizing that it's true. We would, I'm sure Aaron has been in a position where he's had employees that are bringing things, either good or bad, that are happening at home to work, and that's affecting the overall dynamic and the productivity of his team. And it's great to have a person come in and interview for a job, but you're talking about changing someone's whole life. You're moving to this location, you're living there. You may be only socializing with the people that are on the ranch, depending on how remote it is. So it's a big commitment for the spouse on either side of that to, you know, they have to be a team and they have to be on board with their spouse being part of that job. So yeah, that's probably an area that we have ignored in ranching, maybe a little too much in some of the hiring, probably to their detriment.
Trey had even said it, he does some interviews with the spouse as well, brings them in as part of that application process to really make sure that it's a good fit long term. Because, well, Aaron, in Red Lodge, it's a bit more populated than some of the areas that we discussed. I'm sure your Wyoming operation is a bit more desolate, and it's just something that's a little bit tricky to grasp onto if you haven't been there before. Aaron, anything to add on that before I really dive into the onboarding?
Oh, that's a great segue into some of that I did miss, is that, as Rachel was saying, part of that has helped too is that if we can hire those folks in that demographic, oftentimes they have a little bit less that they come with. I don't want to say baggage, but they aren't often coming with a wife and 6 horses and 4 dogs and a semi load of gear. Like it kind of it's helped a lot in that aspect. And when you talked about like hiring people and dragging and bringing them to a different area, I think that we've had the upper hand, right? Being in close to the mountains in a picturesque area, and maybe a little bit more attractive than a place like the Sandhills in Nebraska. It's in the eye of the beholder, but I think that helps kind of you can sell some scenery in terms of attracting people.
And Trey said if you hire a single person and you want to get them invested in the community, they might need some more time off in the evenings to go and actually mingle with other people that aren't on the ranch. So I appreciated that from him as well. All right, Aaron, now we're going to get into the actual thing that we're discussing today. And this is onboarding. As Rachel said, it's really just bringing on an employee, getting them set for the best start of what they can do on that ranch. So, Aaron, why is onboarding so important to you in your real ranch world application? And then what does that really look like in action? Kind of walk us through what you do at Switchback Ranch.
Right. I love to talk about that. So we possibly opened a can of worms that will slow us down a little bit here. But I've realized, especially maybe in the last 10 years, just how important that is, and did not recognize that in the early stage of either being an employee or being a manager or supervisor. But the more each iteration or each year, I've gained more appreciation for that. And I think that's been our absolute key, right? If we can follow a lot of what you had talked about with Trey, and hire the right people and comb through those resumes and call the references and get the right people there, by the time they show up on day one, that's when it's our time to shine. And that means for us, I think it's been wildly helpful to be sure that we're prepared. So I usually will have pre-prepared kind of an outline or a checklist that I'll hand them. And we walk through that step by step. And that first day, it's a time commitment that's hard to swallow, but I think that it's the cheapest investment we can make in terms of success for that employee. So it might take a half a day for us to get through signing somebody up. And so they walk in, and if we haven't sent it to them ahead, it's please fill out your W-9 and, all of the new hire paperwork that's necessary. W-4, I-9, all of our new hire paperwork ahead of time. And then once we dig into that, then I've handed the kind of the outline to them, and we're going to go through gate lock combinations and maps and neighbors and living kind of not rules, but at least some boundaries. Like you're living near people, no loud music, and let's live in a community and not end up jeopardizing the next day's work because of how you're carrying on at night. Vendors, like here's a list of some of the main vendors that we're going to need to know. This is the guy that'll be filling your propane tank or things like that. Here's what we do with receipts and invoices. When you go to Ace Hardware and charge something, you bring the receipt here and you write on the receipt what it's for. And that way they're tied into that program for the fiscal responsibility, right? And they understand, like, I don't just charge something and throw the receipt over my shoulder. I try to walk through kind of our budgeting and the economic overarching economic plan on the ranch, which means like here are the different enterprises and the way that we do that accounting and make sure that they know what they're a part of and kind of how that fits the bigger picture. Maybe the different units on the ranch, and then go and take a tour around the ranch and show them where they get gas and or diesel and where they fill that up and where tools and supplies are at, and salt and mineral and all of that. So I hope I didn't elaborate too much, but that's been something that I've really committed to with every person that's come, whether it's a seasonal or an apprentice or even a part-time worker. I think that I just have to block that, half to 2/3 of their first day and know that we have to cover those basics. And it's not the same for every person, right? Like somebody that's coming to mow lawns, we're going to have an entirely different script than somebody that's coming to move cows or somebody that's coming to irrigate.
So, Aaron, I noticed you didn't mention that you're teaching them how to mow the lawn, teaching them how to move cows, or teaching them how to irrigate. This doesn't have
Yeah.
anything to do with the actual on the ground work that's being done at this point.
And that's where very insightful, Haylie. So that's day one. That's objective office time, clean hands type of work. And what I've had some neat opportunities to work under managers that have passively taught me things that have been so helpful. And it's just little details like how to take notes when you're on a phone call, or how to keep track of records, or um, little added touches. I'm diverting a little bit here, but little added touches to some 22-year-old young lady that comes to work for us, and she's midway through the summer and kind of hits a lull in the season. And if you can just send a little note to her folks or his folks or whoever and say, man, Haylie or Rachel is doing a great job this summer, you should be so proud. And like that just picks them up so much. And you can't do that for every one of them, but it seems like that just lights a fire under people and lets them know that you care. So then it goes to getting your hands dirty. And through that course of, the experiences that I've been fortunate enough to be exposed to, we spent some time training some military, like elite military people, how to pack and go to the mountains and pack guns on donkeys and stuff like that, which was totally abstract, but a neat experience. I don't have military experience, but they just ingrained it upon us, even though we were the educators. Like, see it, do it, teach it. Not something that was familiar to me, but I take that motto with our seasonals, and it's like we have to buckle down and spend that first, I would say, 2 weeks probably. Sometimes it's abbreviated down to a week, but it's like you're going to go to work with me, and if it's changing gated pipe or it's moving electric fence or it's moving cows, I'm going to show you the baseline of what this is going to look like and how you're going to do this and teach that to you. You're going to teach it, or you're going to show me that you can do it, step 2. And then the third step is you're going to teach me how to do it. And once we have kind of surpassed that hurdle, I feel pretty comfortable at that point. Like we've done the clean hands work, we've gotten dirty, we've had some early days or longer nights getting through that. And at that point, I typically have felt pretty comfortable, and that might be 3 or 4 or 5 days, or it might be 2 weeks. Then I can step away and say, this person's got it, with periodic check-ins and the right structure, that this person at least has had that hands-on touch.
So, Aaron, I want to talk about time with this. I want to talk about time on the front end, which you kind of laid it out. You've got the clean work day, you've got the dirty hand stuff, and then you've got a couple of weeks, I think you said, of more hands holding. Of course, that's going to be less or more depending on that specific employee. But then now that you've invested that much of your time or other staff members' time in that training, what's the sweet spot for a seasonal employee to where it wasn't just all training and not that much productive work at the end of it?
Yeah, that's a delicate balance at best, right? To try to classify that. And every individual is different, right? Like I had kind of mentioned, it might be 3 days. Then somebody came with a skill set that's on the upper end of those in their peer group, and you acknowledge that, and actually you can set sail a lot faster. So, but others might be a little bit slower, and it might take 2 or 3 or 4 iterations of showing them how to do something, or getting them through livestock work and irrigating and fencing or weed spraying or whatever that might be. So I think that we have to be open-minded, right, as a leader and as a supervisor, and know that there's not a solid script. And at some point we have to turn those seasonal or entry-level employees over to other people on the ranch that are going to be leaders for them. And we have to figure out how we best set that up, right? Like you can't, there's people that work in full-time positions that are not good teachers, and they're not good leaders, and they're phenomenal, fantastic doers, but teaching is not their strong point. So I think it's a matter of exposing them to all types of people, but don't release that new employee with the wrong person, because I've done that, and I'm sure we all have, but I've done that, and those are the stories that you have of situations or employees that really we let our guard down, and they didn't have a good summer or a good season working for us because we didn't invest the time.
Rachel, with the work that you've done with your students, multiple ranches that will take them on as interns, of course, there are going to be managers that are better and worse at that, this entire onboarding process. I don't want to air anybody's dirty laundry too much, but can you give us an example of how this can go severely wrong if it really isn't addressed?
Yeah, unfortunately, we do have some examples of how it can go wrong. And part of it goes back to the structure of the program. Those students are arriving for most ranches at a really busy time. They might be in the middle of AI, they're kicking up irrigation, really starting to move livestock if they're in a regenerative system quickly. So it is hard, I think, for some ranches to really intentionally set out that time that Aaron was talking about, that clean hands time. They expect them to hit the ground running, and that can lead to a disaster. And it might not lead to a disaster right away, but what I see, especially with the young people, is if they hit the ground and right away have a negative experience, they make a mistake, they're in the wrong place at the wrong time, they, reduce the productivity or mess up a day's gather or something like that, it can really shake their confidence to the foundation. And when you have someone then who is really that they lack the confidence, they don't feel maybe like they're in a safe place where they can talk to someone about their experience and move forward positively, I think you've set them back at a rate that you might never get out of them the productivity that you could during a summer otherwise. It takes some time to build back up the confidence and the ability to jump in and really give of themselves to that operation. Instead, they're holding back, and they're nervous and afraid of making a mistake and causing something to go wrong moving forward. So that's the biggest downfall that I have seen within my program, is just not taking time to understand, who do I report to, who do I go to when I have a problem, um, where's the gate in this pasture that we're moving to and from. That's one complaint I hear about students. We're gathering cattle, and I don't even know whether we're supposed to head them north, south, east, or west out of this place. And so just that bit is going to give them so much more confidence to allow them to really be a valuable contributor.
Aaron, we'll probably talk more about this in a future episode when we talk about retaining employees. But as Rachel's discussing, somebody that has had their confidence, rattled, or somebody that may end up having some ill will because they feel like they were sort of just left in the dark, we really get into the terms of conflict resolution, which is not something a lot of ranches really wanted to discuss. There's a reason when we talk succession planning, there's constantly uncles that don't talk to brothers and daughters that don't talk to dads. And, I think conflict resolution is probably a weak spot for ranching in general. Do you do anything with that with your onboarding? Let folks know, if something's not up to spec, let us know how to go about that.
That's yeah, we do, Haley. And I kind of, when I was gleaning over the trying to not read through my kind of my onboarding checklist, I think that something that's important that we do talk about is kind of here's the organization chart in a sense, or here's the flow chart or the hierarchy of if I'm not here, this is who you answer to, or this is who you ask direction of, or if it's an emergency, here's who you talk to. And that way they kind of know who to go to. Or conversely, they don't, if ultimately they end up working for somebody else, they know that that's their first place to complain. But if they're not getting, not complain, but look for solution. If they're not getting the answers they need, then here's the next person in line that you talk to. I think that that's been really helpful and hopefully avoids some conflict. Something else that this kind of ties to it but doesn't is that if we can ask these employees at the beginning of their season, like, can you provide a set of goals that you'd like to achieve through the summer? That's something that we can do to help again, put the onus back on their shoulders. Not goals like, oh, we want to increase stocking rate on the ranch, but I want to learn how to weld. I want to learn how to do a grazing plan. I want to sit and process invoices with you one day a week or something like that. And I think that gives people total buy-in. And I think that it, in a way, routes us around those real troubled times because uh, they understand the process from top down and bottom up.
Aaron, I'm curious, being, the in this management role that you're in, and you're discussing, the onboarding pieces with multiple employees. You're talking about invoices. You're talking about a lot of office work. What does your week look like, actually on the ground versus just doing clerical type tasks?
Never enough office time, right? If you follow the ranching for profit model and you should at least spend one day a week and maybe that's two half mornings, it's never enough of that. But there's weeks that it might be feed in this time of the year, maybe you're feeding or providing supplement for cows for 3 hours in the morning and then shake the rest of the day loose to kind of do office work. It seems like oftentimes through the course of the year, the winter time, you can catch up and do a lot of that planning and in some ways get through backlog on administrative type work. And then in the summertime, you end up processing invoices or getting back to emails on a Sunday afternoon or a Friday night at 6 o'clock to try to catch up and not have a bookkeeper that's waiting on you for some sort of an answer. But um, I think big picture, it's heavy office load in the wintertime, trying to make sure that you are still out there helping the crew. Summertime, it's a lot more because of the scale. The scale is large on the ranch, but at the same time, it's small in the sense of employees. So if you look at the peer group of folks that maybe like you're talking to Trey and some of those guys, I'm fortunate that the ranches that I've been able to be a part of, we get to have a lot of hands-on time with our crew and with the livestock, and that's what's really anchors me. That's what keeps me doing this is that I like the people and I like the livestock and I don't end up having to be pushing papers most every day. So I think that kind of covers day to day or an annual basis in a broad spectrum.
Something I think a lot of folks in agriculture don't take the time to do because going back to Dallas Mounts, where it's you got to work on the ranch as well as in the ranch. And there's so much on the business that doesn't often happen. So I appreciate that. As
Yes.
we look back and reflect on onboarding, of course, as you've mentioned, you've been hiring employees, Aaron, for years now in different types of environments. But, we're talking primarily projects and construction and agriculture where it is really, really tricky stuff that you need to know what you're doing or you can have some major catastrophic errors. So, can you give us maybe any examples that have really gone wrong that don't put it out
Yeah.
there too much for you? I
Yeah.
wanted to air dirty laundry today, apparently.
I'll take it. I'll take it. I think that there's a couple of classic examples of failures on my part, and right, we don't learn from successes, not as well anyways, but we dang sure learn from failures. And like I had said just a few minutes ago, I've been fortunate enough to be able to really work with and side by side with a lot of the folks that we've hired. Unlike, I think, people in our peer group that don't get that opportunity, right? They have to hire 10 seasonals and they don't get that one-on-one FaceTime. They just don't have that capacity in terms of their day-to-day schedule. So, I think it's fit well for me just with my personality type, but there's been years that maybe we've hired 3 or 4 or 5 seasonals and, we're just stretched too thin. And so I can think of one in particular, maybe 4 or 5 years ago that it was like we had 3 people come on within like a week or two period, and I had to dedicate time to those that needed it the most. And there was another one that didn't get time, and I turned that person loose with somebody that wasn't fit to be a supervisor and do the training. And it was because I hadn't prepared them. And that person just had a terrible summer. They made it through. I mean, they were oblivious to the fact that they had a bad summer, but in my opinion, they had a bad summer because they didn't succeed, right? They got done, fixed the fence and do the things that were on their list, but they didn't have the capacity or the ability or the prompt to think outside the box and to be like, I can make a lot of this if I'm challenged and I'm given that opportunity. Um, I think this is an important time to interject this, that I worked for, like I said, some people that were really objective driven type supervisors above me, general managers, things like that, or owners, and those that were more touchy feely and like really cared about the people. But one of the things that I learned from an objective person, um, during the Turner time was that our job is not to get these employees and then keep them forever. Rather, our job is to attract good employees, build their skill set, train them, and then be proud that we can set them out into the workplace to do a better job for somebody else. And that's a tough pill to swallow. And like, it's really humbling when one of your best employees that you've groomed for the last, I mean, 2 weeks ago, we had a guy leave that I'd groomed for the last 3 years, and he wanted to do bigger things. And man, that's humbling, right? But all you can do is go back to the foundation that this is exciting, good for you, and I think somebody's going to be really proud to have you. So I think that going back to our basic kind of core values, like we're in a position to attract good people, train them, and 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 hope they love agriculture and love what they're doing, and go do something great for somebody else as well. So
To that point, Aaron, how do you approach it when you do get a seasonal employee that's a rock star and it wasn't the intent to have them, full time, but you are thinking this person really has aptitude and growth potential within our operation?
yeah, that happens often if we've done our due diligence on the front end, right? In our interview process and gotten it down to our top 3 candidates and made sure that we had buy-in from the rest of our crew, and that ultimately we picked that right candidate. And we've set that up as a seasonal position. Um, I think that ranching is so complex. I just was visiting with a guy yesterday that actually went through Rachel's program, and it's the ability to expand businesses within what we've got, right? Whether it's a family operation and somebody wants to come home and add a family member to direct market beef, or do an embryo transfer project, or do a breeding project. Like, I think that's where it's created opportunity for us, is if we have those great people that we've attracted and groomed and built them up, we can oftentimes find a way to get that value back out of them, to where we could roll that into a full-time job. And that's happened a number of times, to where it's like we would be crazy not to find a spot for this person, even though we maybe don't have it at the onset of it. Like, we set them up for a 5-month seasonal job, but let's roll them into that, and then we have that ability to have them backfill for somebody else, that resilience, and we also can add an enterprise, if it makes sense. So I think that it's something that we take pretty seriously. If we can justify it, and it pencils out financially, we look at that opportunity.
All right. Well, we are already getting close to running out of time. So, Rachel, any final thoughts for you on this discussion?
I really appreciate the intentionality that Aaron approaches this with. I think it's really critical to onboard to have that checklist so you don't forget. He's talking about the complexity of ranching. And boy, that just bleeds over to all the different things that we're asking people to do in this industry, and the little things, paying attention to them, making sure they have the keys to the fuel tank and they understand where to go to get more propane in their house. Those are the things that make people feel comfortable, but also seen and heard. Part of that clean hands work is really just it's to humanize people, to see we're paying attention to the little things, and we're paying attention to what makes you comfortable and what makes you feel welcome and seen and heard. And that's really important. And people can put up with a lot of tough stuff, and they can do some really hard work if they feel humanized and they feel seen and feel heard. So that's really fantastic. And I think that's something that we just need to promote as much as possible within our industry, and help people to understand that it's okay to have a checklist and to look back at it. I also appreciate the return on investment. Looking at these employees and realizing that some of them will have a return on that time that you invest in them up front, and others may not as much. But overall, the success rate's going to be so much better if you invest in them up front and you're able to get that productivity out of them, as well as give them a good experience. And as you said, send them on their way into the industry, because who knows, they may come back to you with all kinds of skills later on. The most important part, though, really is just looking at the potential for these seasonal employees to be part of that pipeline. And you invest in them to begin with, and then you might be able to forego the time and the expense of trying to hire and advertise for a new full-time employee. That's a really expensive process and takes a lot of valuable time. So that's that 1 day, 2/3 day investment in that seasonal employee might turn out to save you 2 or 3 whole days later on when you're having to try to advertise and hire and interview for full-time employees. So love the intentional approach, love the way that he's really investing in these people up front. I think those are awesome things to talk about.
And final thoughts from you. And I also want kind of encompassed in this what sort of an offboarding, I guess that's the term. It's not onboarding. You're kicking them now to the next
Yeah.
thing. How you go through that process.
I think final thoughts. One thing that I missed is that continuing education while they're here. It's an investment, right? Like maybe that's a stockmanship clinic that costs us $1,000, but we might get that back in 2 days of their labor in terms of gains on some cattle, or maybe it's a soil health conference or things like that. And it's risky, right? You send people out to go to these things and they're going to rub shoulders and you might have a chance of losing them. But I think that's a calculated expense in the sense that both capital outlay, but social benefit, right, for us. So I think that final thought would be we just have to build these employees up, and know that they're going to do as much as they can while they're here and be bought in on our mission and vision. Um, Offboarding, I have a lot to learn on that, Haley. I really do. I'm not as good at it as I should. We'll usually try to do an exit interview, make sure that we have, updated addresses, things like that. But I don't have as good of a script for that, and it's something that maybe that's a good challenge that you pose my direction, is to do a better job of that. So I think making sure that we cover the bases is like, do people leave because of other opportunity, or do they leave because of culture? And is that the underlying reason for them looking for another job? So I don't know the answer to that, but I think that that's part of that offboarding, is trying to pull back that layer of the onion a couple times, and understand really why they're leaving us.
Rachel, of course, for the interns with your program, you get to do some of that offboarding and that self-reflection with them, I'm sure. Any tips that you might have?
Gosh, I can't think of anything that Aaron didn't cover really. I mean, yeah, we use the interns and their feedback and students coming through this program to try to improve it all the time. And, students who leave the program, maybe transfer out partway through, want to find out, is it something that is personal, that is leading them away with different dreams, different desires, different goals for their career, or is it something structural that we're doing? And if you can separate those two out, then those can be really valuable tools to help you improve any kind of program, whether it's a ranch, culture, or whether it is the structure of a academic program. Either way, what is driving people away or encouraging, influencing them away? And is it things that we can change and improve, or things outside of our control? Because at the end of the day, they have free will, right? It's one of the things that makes them most valuable as employees or students or participants in our programs. But it also can be the thing that can be frustrating, because it takes them away after we've invested time or effort into their success. But it's a beautiful thing about humanity, that free will component.
Something that I missed that I think is really valuable is that we think oftentimes of farming and ranching as being a dirty, tough job, and you have to be masculine and muscle your way through it. But I was running through last night with my wife, kind of tallying up seasonal employees that we've hired over the years, and it's about 50-50, males and females. And I think that when I look at that historically and the feedback I've gotten from those employees years later, I think it's been far more impactful. And some of the females that we've hired, it has been an absolute hands down best hire, because they come at it with their eyes wide open, and they're not going to muscle their way through things. They're going to go at it and work through the situation with their mind. And I think it's an important thing that we in this industry need to definitely consider is like there's an awful lot that they can do, and we're in a world of hydraulics and being able to kind of leverage mind over matter and get an awful lot done without having to say we got to force our way through it with muscle. So I just want to shed some light on that some of the best hires we've had and that have come back multiple years have been women that are keen to be in the ag business and that have then gone on subsequently to expand their careers.
Always love it when a man especially brings attention to that gender gap that so often exists in perceptions in agriculture. So thank you again to Aaron Paulson, as well as to our co-host Rachel Frost for joining me in this conversation. Come back again 2 weeks. We're going to drop the next episode of the Ranch Stewards Podcast. It's all about employee retention. You've hired well, you've onboarded well. Now, what can you do to make sure you stop the revolving door of employees? That's coming up right here on the Ranch Workforce Project, a collaboration of the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and the Dan Scott Ranch Management Program at Montana State University. If you are enjoying these podcasts, we would love for you to share the message, share it with a friend, subscribe, throw something up on your social medias. It really does make all of the difference. Thanks for tuning in.